So the webinar is being run in conjunction with Africa Bio, and as you may know, we are an association focusing on Southern African laboratory diagnostics. So we would like to discuss the current value of IVDs in the industry in the Southern African region, obviously, the challenges that we faced during COVID, the pandemic, as well as future innovation. So as you know, our association encompasses a number of members. We have over 50 members, and they range from multinationals to local companies who import and supply all sorts of IVDs, in vitro diagnostics, to the public as well as to laboratories, hospitals, and various other institutions. So we're focusing the discussion around that. We're also focusing on some regulatory aspects. One of our guests is Dr. Dimakatsu Matibo from SAHPRA, who is our local South African regulator, a medical product regulator, because as you know, if we issue products or in vitro diagnostics out into the public arena, they need to be registered and licensed. So she will give an overview of how this licensing process has worked during COVID. Our other guests will be Daniel Ndima from Cape Biotechnologies. It's a South African biotechnology company that specializes in biomanufacturing of molecular biology technologies. They're very innovative. He's going to also discuss COVID diagnostic test innovation and development because, you know, our focus is not only to import global diagnostics, but also to focus on innovation in the Southern African context.
Now, for the benefit of some of our listeners who may not know, what exactly are we referring to when we speak of an IVD medical device?
Okay, so IVD diagnostics, it's a medical device, whether used alone or in combination, and it's intended by the manufacturer for in vitro examination. So in vitro is out of the body. So obviously used in the laboratory in some instances on specimens derived from patients to provide information for diagnosis, for surveillance, for monitoring. And some examples I can give in the COVID context is COVID testing kits. For example, PCR testing kits or rapid testing kits. Those are all IVDs where we actually do a test, we look at a result, and then we use those results to monitor our patients, to treat our patients, to do surveillance in the populations as we are doing in COVID to assess who's positive, who's negative, who needs to be treated, who needs hospital admission. So in the COVID environment, it's become really valuable in that we're doing a lot of testing all through the continent and globally to check who's positive and negative. In some instances, we're using molecular methods, PCR, for example, which take a bit longer to get a result. And we're also using rapid diagnostics where we want a quick result in a couple of hours in some instances. And I won't go into a lot of detail, but we're also looking at antigen as well as antibody testing. So when I speak about antigen, we're looking at whether a patient has active disease. Antibody, we're looking at whether they had disease in the past or whether they were exposed to a particular virus. So the diagnostics that we can use can be for various infectious diseases, for bacteria, for viruses, for parasites. So they have different kind of uses in the infectious diseases milieu.
How has the COVID-19 pandemic affected this market?
It has affected the market in that there's very high demand for COVID testing kits, particularly. I'm not even talking about other infectious diseases, but, you know, there's been high demand. Some of these kits are produced overseas. To get them into South Africa and the Southern African region has been very challenging, and that's why we're also working to designing some of our own, and that's why innovation, the discussion of innovation is so important on the continent, that we develop our own, that we train our researchers and our scientists on these new innovative products. So that's been one of our challenges. The other challenge, as I mentioned before, is from a regulatory perspective. Bringing products in, we want to make sure these are products of quality. We don't want any counterfeit or false products going out into the market. And there has been quite a lot of that in the COVID environment in which we find ourselves. So the regulators had to review all applications very stringently of these diagnostics and make a decision on what can be used, what can't, submit communiques out to the public and the medical fraternity to ensure that we're using valid diagnostics, certified diagnostics.
What sort of opportunities do you expect to see for the IVD market in the near future, particularly in Southern Africa and the rest of the African continent?
I think we are all as a continent working on innovation, as I mentioned before, and trying to work on our own and also working with other stakeholders to look at the pricing around these IVD diagnostics. If we're going to bring in larger amounts onto the continent, we want good pricing around this. So I think there are various consortia being developed, to fast-track bringing these diagnostics in as well. But also I think the innovation process will help us in the long term to develop our own on the continent. And we have some very competent scientists and researchers on the continent, who are working on this in conjunction with other stakeholders like Africa's CDC, for example, who have got a vested interest on this sort of work on the continent.